Cash Flow Diary Podcast, episode 475.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cash Flow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cash Flow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cash Flow Diary Podcast. I am your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today because here's the thing. When it comes down to it, there's a difference between, we'll say, book knowledge and experiential knowledge and going out there into the marketplace and actually deploying that knowledge so that you could turn a profit. Now, at the end of the day, I know that you're here because you want to grow your cash flow. You want to make it better. You want to make sure that you are on the cutting edge of everything that you could possibly do. And sometimes that requires us to look at subjects that we may not always consider or think about. And in this case, we're talking economics, innovation, the economy, capitalism, and all of those things. Now, even though I can't see you, by a show of hands, how many of you had economics? Yeah, okay, there was a lot of you. I get that. But how many of you had economics from a person who actually participated in the economy in some way other than just teaching about economics? That's a completely different thing. And I think what's exciting today is we've got a person who's done exactly that. He's recently revised and updated his book, Doing Capitalism in the Innovation Economy. I'm, of course, talking about Bill Janeway. And if you can think of this, he's actually led what he would call the double life of a theorist practitioner because he's been out there in the field. A PhD in economics at Cambridge, 35 years working at Warburg Pincus, also known as, let's just say, I don't know, we want to call them the granddaddy of the internet, the sugar daddy of the internet. They're the ones who have founded and been very instrumental in financing some of the internet infrastructure companies that we know about that allow us to go out there and buy and sell things today. Then after doing that, retired, goes back to teach and helping entrepreneurs on how to think and how to understand and how to work in today's economy. Because at the end of the day, understanding the future is really important, but also understanding what's going on today can make all the difference. So I've said all this to say, we're going to learn a lot today. I hope you got your big girl and big boy pants on because we're going to have some fun. Help me welcome Bill Janeway. Bill, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jay. I'm just delighted to be with you here. Particularly because your podcast is called about cash flow.
Yep.
And one of the first things I learned, and I learned it the hard way, was what my mentor way back 35, 40 years ago used to say: corporate happiness is positive cash flow. when you're paying your bills, because your customers are giving you more money than it costs to deliver them the product or the service that you're selling. That means that, first of all, you've really got validation that what you're doing is worthwhile. And second, you've gained liberation from depending on other people's money, from the kindness of strangers or the speculators. And that, I'm afraid, is what some of the most visible, exciting, thrilling companies out there like Uber and Tesla are going to have to learn. They're going to have to get to positive cash flow, just as you say to your audience. That's what you're helping them do.
Oh, we're going to have some fun today, and I am so glad that you are here. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so before we get too far into it, I've got to ask you the same question I tend to ask everybody else the first time that they're here. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes. So, Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, etc. Because I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. For example, as an entrepreneur, I can occasionally envision myself flying around town and saving my customers with their products and services. And who knows, maybe I am wearing a cape and tights. At the same time, though, I think every entrepreneur has a beginning, just like every superhero has a beginning. So Spider-Man, for example, there was a time where he was just a kid going to school, doing his thing, trying to take some photos. That's it, minding his own business. And then one day he gets bit by the spider and realizes, oh my goodness, I've got special abilities and I get to choose to whether to use them for good or for evil. So my question to you is as follows. Before your time at Warburg, before the degree in Cambridge, before just everything that we know you for today, what we really want to know is, who is Bill Janeway?
That's a very interesting question. I guess you could say I've spent my entire life working on addressing it, finding out. And I guess what I've learned is it's learning by doing. It's that process of trying to find out what you're good at and what you enjoy doing and hope that there's some overlap between the two. I discovered pretty early when I was a kid that I was pretty smart in school, got good grades, got into Princeton University, and had a wonderful time there. I actually graduated as valedictorian of my class. That was the great class of 1965 with Bill Bradley leading Princeton for the one and only time, the Final Four. A class to remember.
Indeed.
And then I got a Marshall Scholarship to Cambridge, and I just loved it there. I did a lot of work in trying to understand how the world had struggled in the 1920s and 30s and wound up with the Great Depression and on to World War II. But when I finished there, I was really frustrated because I didn't want to keep staying in the academic world. And so I kind of by accident, stumbled into the world of finance. But there I discovered something really interesting was going on. And that was the development of computers and networking them together and finding out what they were good for doing, what they were better at than people, but where people were still better than they were. And I got really immersed in that. And that's when I discovered that helping entrepreneurs, and I mean helping in multiple ways, helping them to build new businesses was something that I both really enjoyed, even though, as one of my closest colleagues and friends said, the only law of venture capital is that grief is a constant. Something's always going wrong. You always are getting that call at 2 a.m. But helping entrepreneurs, supporting them, but also providing some discipline, because, superheroes may be able to fly through the pages of the comic strip or the movies, but real entrepreneurs don't just need to have a dream and a vision. They need fuel, that's cash, on the one hand, and they need focus and, how shall I put it, something between a kind of big brother and a Dutch uncle, somebody who can, maybe we've seen some examples of this pretty recently in the unicorn founder universe of people who needed something sometimes a little, upside the head when they got way ahead of themselves and lost any sense of proportion or responsibility. So that kind of multiple role, I found, I kind of found myself there. And then when it came time, as Warburg Pincus was a great firm, and I'd made my contribution. It was time for me to step out of the way of the younger guys I'd helped train. Then the opportunity to go back and teach what I'd learned, first just in the classroom, and then through this book that you referred to, Doing Capitalism in the Innovation Economy, was a way of bringing to bear and sharing the lessons I'd learned about how the world gets transformed by technology, how the world we live in and work in gets transformed, and both how I learned it and what you need to know about it as we go forward.
So I find this interesting. There's so many things that I want to just ask you, because again, I mentioned this earlier, there's so few people who teach economics who have actually participated in the ways that they start teaching. You have a lot of practical knowledge that it's almost like, I feel like flying to one of your classes. And like, I mean, I'm not exactly wanting to go to school, but I think you would be fun to listen to, and I could learn a lot from, which suggests that there's a hole in a lot of entrepreneurs' knowledge just about how these things work, chief among them innovation and technology, but also just even venture capitalists and money, and what on earth are people looking at? Because you alluded to it, and now we're going to talk about it. I'm
Right.
like, how can people value certain companies as what I'm like, you got to make, how come they get to have that valuation, but they don't make no money? That's the part I'm still completely flabbergasted by, and I don't understand.
Well, you know what? I agree with you completely. But let me take a step or two to get to dealing
Sure.
with the unicorns, because what I got to tell you, everything I learned the hard way. I learned by making mistakes, by working out how to fix them with the help of really good partners and colleagues and friends. So what I'm going to say now is not just off the top of my head. I really did learn that, first of all, when you're trying to build something new, when you're at the frontier, you got to try to construct hedges, ways of protecting yourself from what you cannot know in advance. And in particular, what I learned, and this gets right back to the title of your podcast, what I learned is that there's one way to protect yourself against what cannot be known in advance. And that is by having access to cash and enough control of the circumstances to use it constructively when bad things happen. Now, what that means, that feeds right into the driving goal for the entrepreneur and the venture capitalist who's backing them to get to positive cash flow. That's the source of secure ability to grow without the threat of getting caught by surprise from behind the backstage. And that's where that gets us to these unicorns. We're clearly in a world where two things have occurred over the last dozen years since the great internet .com bubble blew up, since the global financial crisis. The internet, the digital context, computing and networking has matured to the point where, first of all, the frictions that used to slow down and limit the growth of business have been radically reduced. The markets that can be addressed by Facebook, by Google, are just so enormously greater than we ever knew before.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what creates the possibility of these new digital companies, these superstar companies that grow at enormous pace, consuming enormous amounts of cash till they get to the promised land, as indeed Google and Facebook did. But you've got another factor, and I think this is what's motivating the enormous flow of cash into these companies that are burning that cash as fast as they can. And that's that since 2008, since the global financial crisis froze the world, we've had interest rates, we've had safe investments yielding so little return, effectively zero to negative, that it's pushed the big institutional investors to taking more risk in the hope of getting more return. There is no example in history. Anybody who looks at my book will see that I'm a real student of history, of economic history, financial history, technology history. There is no example of companies being valued at premium valuations like an Uber or an Airbnb when they're still private, and when you buy their stock, you can't sell it. So we've got an unusual, and I must say, I think, unsustainable set of circumstances. Enormous potential market and growth, zero alternative, safe, real return, driving this unicorn bubble, which I do believe is vulnerable as interest rates start rising, and they are rising in the US now ahead of the rest of the world. As those interest rates start rising, if I were, and I'm not, directly involved with any of the super new digital unicorns, I would be beating on the management team, providing my support to the entrepreneurs. Give me a plan to get to positive cash flow fast.
Yeah.
That's the message.
Well, and it's just amazing to me that it's kind of okay that they're not already. You know, that public sentiment would be in that fashion. Now,
Jay,
Yeah.
you can see the pressure building. You know, if
Sure.
you read about Uber right now, for example, in the newspaper this morning, article that Uber may kill the $500 million a year that it's spending for its driverless car. Because the time horizon on that is so long distant, the challenges, both the technical and the regulatory and the legal challenges, are so huge. There's an article saying, the board is telling Dara, the new CEO, you better really think about whether you want to keep doing this, because we're going to have to get to positive cash flow. We can't depend on the endless supply. Remember, Uber burned $4 billion in the last 12 months. You believe that?
That's a staggering number, and
Yeah.
and these are the things that don't correlate for me. Is that number, and at least in my head, shows up in red, but yet that their valuation does not reflect that. And to your point, they're betting. It seems like they're betting on a strategy that's a long time from now. But yet that doesn't seem to slow down. I mean, what does a company do in that type of situation when their idea is the cat's out of the bag? Is the idea is not going to go back in, so they've got to do something, or what? I mean, I just don't even understand, because I see how getting rid of the human cost out of that could make a ton of sense. But if I'm the entrepreneur on the other end, what do I look at? What are my options?
Well, I'm saying the opposite, that they can't afford to keep investing in trying to get the human being out of the car. That They got to cut back, narrow their sights, stay in, and that means the money they're spending is going into new cities and building the base in new cities. I'm not going to dream of trying to provide a game plan for Uber. All I'm saying is that it does look like even Uber is coming under pressure to exercise discipline, to build a path towards where its customers, not its investors, are going to be paying the bills that it takes to deliver the service. And that is I have every confidence. If there's one thing I would bet on, sooner or later, the unicorns that survive will survive as cash positive businesses, not endlessly dependent on selling stock to raise money versus getting paid by their customers to deliver value to them.
Got it. And it only seems fair that they would have to do such things, because that's exactly how I feel. Now, you mentioned earlier that one of the things that you enjoy doing was helping entrepreneurs to build business. How does understanding innovation and technology in our current environment and would help an entrepreneur, build business?
Hello there, entrepreneur. This is Jay Massey. I know that if you've ever gone over to the site, cashflowdiary.com, you may have asked yourself, where on earth do you get a domain name from? Especially as you are beginning to build your bigger, better, badder business, you need a web presence. You need the email address. You need a way for people to contact you electronically so that you can stop doing the @gmail.com game. Well, the good folks over at GoDaddy have definitely supplied us with every domain that we have ever used. So what I want you to do is I want you to go over to trygodaddy.com/cashflow diary. Again, that's trygodaddy.com/cashflow diary, because it's a quick way for you to get set up to capture your domain name the exact way that you want it. They got easy search functions, and most importantly for you is that you'll be up and running today. As I said, once you get started, stay started. Don't let small little obstacles of how to get your own domain name going stop you. So again, go to trygodaddy.com/cashflow diary, and let's get back to the rest of the story.
Well, first, the technology is one part of it, and the technology is increasingly accessible. The big cloud companies, and I'm now talking about sort of digital businesses. I'm not talking about a flower shop or a barber shop, a restaurant. I don't know anything more about them than I do than any other customer does. But if you're talking about building a business on a technology base, the first thing is, as I say, that the access to technology has become much, much cheaper. Open source software, that's free.
Mm-hmm.
Access to, you don't have to buy your own computers anymore. You rent them from Amazon or Microsoft or Google. That's called the cloud. So you can scale your business using the resources, data storage, data processing, as you grow your business incrementally. You don't have to spend a lot of money up front. That's the good news. But now here's the flip side. The flip side is that back in the good old days, up until about 2000, software companies in particular had a unique advantage because it had become standard practice that you could sell a license, a non-exclusive license, to use your software as a customer. You could sell that for an upfront payment, a large payment, which came with an ongoing stream of maintenance payments so that the new company could keep the software running as the world evolved. What that meant was that the customers were financing the growth of these new software companies. But then we had a big shift, and now it's called software as a service. The customer only pays as they consume and use the software that you've delivered to them. That means that the cost of building the business now needs more and more risk capital. It used to be you could build a business and get to positive cash flow in the software industry for maybe $20, $30 million over 2 or 3 years. Now it's more like 200 million and more like 6, 7, 8 years. Now that's one reason, it's a critical reason why a lot of new businesses, really smart, committed, young men and women, and increasingly women, are doing startups that get bought early by the companies that already exist. Because the time to get to independence, self-sustaining, and particularly if you're not trying to hype yourself as the next Google or the next Facebook, you're not a unicorn. You're just doing useful work that's going to benefit a lot of customers. The best way now for that to succeed is to have Amazon or Microsoft say, you know what, you're doing something really terrific. We like it. We're going to buy you. We'll give you a job to make sure that it will fit into our environment, to what we're selling as the big service for everybody. That's a huge shift in the way that technology gets built and delivered to the world. And the goal of establishing that independent, cash positive business is daunting in a world where you're instead of the rich customer funding the little poor startup is in a sense providing financing, user financing to the big company. It's a big shift, and I think it hasn't been fully appreciated, though all you have to do is look at the number of acquisitions that the big technology companies are doing every month, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Oracle, to see that this pattern has really taken hold.
Well, okay. So if that's the we'll say the new way to make things work, and I hear exactly what you're saying. How does an entrepreneur even begin to? I mean, you're saying from the beginning, design your business to be bought by someone else.
That's Jay. You are really swift. I actually in this new edition of my book, I've got a kind of postscript to the first half of the book, which is all about my own journey of education, as I say, the hard way, into participating in building those companies in the 1980s that transformed the internet. But there's a postscript to it, and I identify a set of risks that each entrepreneur faces. The first is the technology risk. You know, when I plug it in, does it light up, or does it just go? The second is the market risk. Does anybody care?
Right.
Does anybody care? Is there anybody going to pay me for what I've done? And then the third is the financing risk. Is there going to be the capital there to get me to positive cash flow, given that the stream of revenues I'm going to get is likely to be stretched out over a pretty long period of time? And so what I'm saying is explicitly is that at each stage, when you plug it in and it does light up, do we sell now? When we got a couple or three customers who bought it, who like it, who will tell the world we're going to buy more, do we sell now? When we're confronted with a new opportunity to raise more money, do we sell now? And that's the question that every entrepreneur, every angel investor, venture capitalist has to be asking at every stage of the development of the new business.
Is that simply now? Okay, so does any of that change? What if you're positive cash flow at any one of those stages?
Well, once you get there, what I'm saying is that the path to getting there is extended and challenging. Once you get there, boy, you have all the options in the world. You might want to go public. Not very many companies are going public anymore. It takes a bigger business, a bigger offering. Something else that's going on that people haven't really paid attention to, but another big change between now and the 1990s used to be there was a whole family of specialist, focused, relatively small investment banks that took new technology companies public. Now you got 7 banks that run the world, the survivors of the global financial crisis. If you want to get their attention, you got to come to them with a deal on which they're going to make millions and millions and millions of dollars. Not many companies reach that stage. That's the other challenge. But you can still run the business without going public. You can build the business over time. It's amazing. Sometimes I tell my friends and colleagues in the venture capital industry, it's amazing how many companies have been built to scale and have survived without any help from us. A company like Bechtel, for example, or Cargill. These were family businesses that just kept growing. So there is a future out there, but the main thing is you have choices. You're not forced into an immediate sale or merger or downsizing once you get to that positive cash flow, happy country.
So in your experience, is there a way to shortcut that path to positive cash flow?
Well, there can be. There can be some. They typically come with a cost. For example, sometimes you've got a big customer, a really important company that is your customer, and they're beginning to be dependent on you. And they say, "Well, look, we'll do a special deal. We will agree that we're going to only use your stuff, but we want to own some of your company." Now, that sounds good. That sounds great, except
right. Except what's the except?
First, there are a bunch of them. The first one is you, the entrepreneur, and your financial backer have only one interest, and that is the growth in the value of what you're doing. But the big company has all sorts of different interests. And if they decide that maybe they're not as independent, or maybe what you're doing sounds so really good that maybe they ought to start doing it themselves, even if you have a patent, even if there's a contract. Well, you can have a lot of fun as a small growing company suing your biggest customer for violating your intellectual property. So that's one. Second is, well, the day comes when you realize that you're kind of peaking out. You can see the end of the runway. And now it really is time to sell. But now you can't have an open auction because your big customer, which owns a piece of you, is already there. And who's going to try to bid against them? They know more than any outside company could know. And they've already got a seat at the table inside the wall. So that what looks like the way to short circuit, the hard road to positive cash flow, can actually really compromise what happens at the end of the day.
Got it. And that makes a ton of sense. So what would you say then is, let's pretend I'm starting a business today. If I wanted to put myself in the best position to be able to deal with this changing landscape, what's step number one?
Well, first of all, let me tell you how I read a business plan, the order in which I read a business plan. So the first thing I do is I read the biographies. So what have these guys, these men and women, done before? Have they ever been through one of these things? Because startups aren't patty cake. Startups are tough. And if they've only worked in a big company, they may have to go through a learning experience or two. I frankly was always susceptible. I always had a certain leaning towards the guys, the men and women who had been through a failed startup and then came back to try to do it again and do it better. So that's the first thing. The second is, so tell me about the market that you're serving. Tell me about who needs your stuff. Tell me about a hole in the market where there's room for a new company to establish position. Okay? And that will tell you an enormous amount. Are these people who have really studied the field, or are they just throwing darts at the blackboard, at the dartboard? Then, sure, let's look at the technology. What's different? Not is it better, but how is it different? One of the things I learned a long time ago is that just saying, "Oh, I'm better than you. I'm better than IBM. I'm better than Google," doesn't get you very far. I want to know why I'm different, why I'm offering something that is not already available. And finally, and just for a laugh, I'll look at there'll always be some financial forecasts, some, revenues and profits. And, you take a look at that and say, well, these guys, when are we all going to get rich? But I don't pay any attention to that because nobody knows. Nobody knows. So it's people, market, technology in that order. And that's why if you're starting out from scratch, even the names of people who are icons like Steve Jobs, Steve didn't do it all alone. Mark Zuckerberg isn't doing it all alone. Everybody needs a team. So the ability to pull together a team of people with relevant experience and knowledge, experience first and then knowledge, that's the critical first step. And then decide where you're going to focus. Whose problem are you going to solve? And that's what I'm going to be reading and looking for and deciding whether, I really better spend some time with these guys.
Well, there's something that you've said that I find interesting and I would love for everyone to hear. You seem to put a premium on experience, specifically failure, or having had a bad experience in the past. Why is that?
Well, maybe it's a little personal because, as I say, everything I learned about being a successful venture capitalist, I learned the hard way. I learned by what I call in the book, I call it investing in ignorance. I didn't know what I didn't know. And in one or two particular cases, what looked like a great investment, great idea, great market opportunity, almost turned into an absolute catastrophic, complete write-off. And it was almost by a combination of good luck and good timing that we managed to turn situations that had gotten out of control back on track and wound up with a good outcome. So, maybe it's arrogant to say I kind of think I'm pretty smart, but boy, in this world of venturesome business at the frontier of technology, learning the hard way, learning by doing is, I just put an enormous weight on that. Sure, there are occasionally, first time guys who start out and it all goes straight to the moon, and we know who those are. But those are the 1 in 10 million of all the ones who start out to do that. Try to reduce those odds a little bit. I'd rather, if I'm an investor, I'd rather not to have to, discover that it really is Bill Gates or Steve Jobs that I'm backing. I'd rather have a little more evidence that they've learned some things along the way too.
Totally understood.
And by the way, let's remember that Steve Jobs, he had a great first run, but he really, he brought in this fellow John Scully and pushed him out of the company. He had a complete failure in his next computer company. It was called Next.
Yeah, I remember.
And by the time he came back to Apple, he had really had some learning the hard way, learning by doing the hard way. Then the Apple that is the greatest company, maybe in the history of capitalism, took off. But the first version got pretty far, but it didn't become the Apple that we know today.
Right. Totally understood. Now, for those that have listened this far and would like to find out more either about what you're doing or even pick up a copy of the book, what's going to be the best way for them to catch up with you?
Oh, the best way. Hey, this is the world of the internet. Go to my website, www.billjaneway.com. You'll see all about the book, Doing Capitalism and the Innovation Economy. And you'll see some of the writings and also where I've been talking and speaking, because I'm traveling around this country and around Europe as well, looking for opportunities to have this kind of conversation, which frankly, Jay, I have to tell you, has been for me a great conversation.
That's good to hear. I'm glad to definitely hear that for sure. Now, before we end here, I've got another question for you that I would love to get your perspective on. Let's pretend for a second that someone listening, even though they've heard everything that you've said, they've gotten excited that, you know what, they're going to still go throw their hat in the ring. They're standing in front of what I like to often call the superhero outfit store. They're going to become an entrepreneur. They're going to make it happen, right? Now, like I know, that when we get to those moments of decisions, oftentimes we have a companion, and that companion comes in the form of a voice. And that voice often says things like, Are you sure? Did you not hear everything Bill just said? I mean, come on, it's not going to be easy. And for some people, they're even related to that voice. So my question to you is as follows. Let's pretend that they are going to do what you say, and they're going to do so in the next 24 to 48 hours. What would you suggest that they do?
Well, you've already, kind of heard it before. Understand the market you're addressing, but do everything you can as early as possible to line up your fallback insurance policy, the cash that you need to buy the time to fix things when something goes wrong along the way. That's why a great idea without the cash to put it to work and to survive the unexpected bad things that almost always happen along the way is just a great idea, and you might as well keep strolling past that store with the superhero costumes in the window. If you're going to go and put on that, you're not going to come out of that all by yourself successfully. You need partners, and you need some access to the fuel on the basis of which the fuel that you will consume as you learn how to fly.
Yeah. Totally understood. I definitely appreciate your practical approach and understanding. And I secretly wish you had been my economics teacher right now. That's all I'm going to say with that. And I appreciate you sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and your insight here with us today at the Cashflow Diaries there.
Thank you, Jay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means BillJaneway.com. Pick up the book, read it, do it, implement it, but most importantly, get some cash to buy the time that you need to fix it. I thought that was the best thing ever because, guys, here's the thing. There is a lot that you don't know. However, if you do have a little bit of cash, or if you can get to that positive cash flow really quickly, you can buy the time to fix it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.